Thanks for joining me. I have been doing this effort a little bit to learn more about the escape room community and just how all the different aspects come together to build good experiences across the board, whether it's escape room owners, players, franchises, all sorts of things. And so, my goal is just to get your origin story, your background in escape rooms. So let's just start there. Do you remember your first escape room experience? And can you let us know, is there a specific theme or puzzle or something that captured your imagination about them?
I'm in the Rhode Island area, and my first escape room experience actually wasn't the best. I had a friend's birthday party. We had 10 people, which was the max for a room. The room we went to had some problems, and there were just way too many cooks in the kitchen. So it was one of those scenarios where I was like, "Oh, there are really cool puzzles, but I want to let other people do things or." Um, not kind of step over anybody's toes because a lot of people I haven't met before. And
Mm-hmm.
so that experience, it was fine. I was like, oh, that was pretty cool, but nothing that really stood out to me. And then I had a friend visit from Ireland, and he's like, hey, like, me and my wife do a lot of escape rooms. Like, you want to go check out a couple in your area? And I was like, yeah, I'll give it another shot. And this is what I like to say was my first real escape room. It was just a group of four. We went, it was a pretty hard difficulty, but the experience was really cool. We walked in, and the escape room owner was like, okay, you guys are here for this. Yeah. He's like, can you guys help check out something with me real quick? Like, there's some weird noise coming from a closet upstairs, and he led us upstairs, and I haven't done many rooms, so I was just like, yeah, we'll help you out, why not? And he's like, yeah, right in there, can you guys go check it out? And then I was like, I see what's going on here. And it led us into this, like, they actually did a really good job at like recreating an underground cave like within that closet. It was like a Narnia experience. And like from that cave you had to like listen to like the sounds of water droplets to get like some cadence of how to knock on the door within there. And that experience is what, like, after that first room I was like, yeah, I'm in. Like, I love this. There were puzzles, there was a cool immersion, the story was great. And after that we actually did another one later that day. And then my friend was here for a week, and we ended up doing probably about 4 or 5 rooms.
Yeah.
And that's what triggered the I guess hobby, I would say.
So were those, when you had that experience, obviously that sounds like a great, like you walk in the door and you're already being drawn in. I think that's a great kind of analogy that I hear in some stories from people about how that experience from when you walk in the door to when you get out of the room is so important. When you say you did multiple that weekend or that week, what, like, were they all from the same place, or did you go to different escape rooms?
That day we did two in the same location, and then we did another few from another location that was in Providence, Rhode Island. They luckily, all of them ended up being really awesome. We didn't really have any duds. It's pretty rare that, and I've done, I don't know an exact number at this point, but I've done like 60 plus rooms. I've done it in a couple countries, like when traveling, and most of them, are pretty enjoyable. There's a few that, were bad experiences, but those are few and far in between.
Nice. So I've heard people talk about escape rooms in terms of generations, whether it's a Gen 1, Gen 2, Gen 3, whatever type of room. And typically, just in case you're not familiar with the terminology, but it's typically a matter of technology or theming or things like that, where the first gen rooms that first started were very bare bones, had lots of different kinds of locks, but they were basically just locks or keys. And then moving forward, they were more technology based and experience based types things. Do you find that any one of those things is better or worse, or can each of those have their own place and still be enjoyable regardless?
Yeah, so I think you nailed it on that last point where both can be enjoyable. I work in tech and I love technology, so I'm always interested in, I'll be like, oh, well, there's a sensor here. Like, I'm curious to see how this works. And I love the high tech stuff. But with, high tech comes problems. We've had a lot of times where some things just didn't work. And, right away I can see how it all works. And I'm like, hey, this isn't working. And they'll be like, oh, try again. And I'm like, no, 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 it's like the wire's not plugged in. Or just, some sensors just get faulty or get a little finicky. So in that sense, the tech is great. It's really cool. There's a lot of possibilities, but there's more room for error. And sometimes, it can almost like take away from the experience. Some of my favorite rooms that I've had were very, very low tech. Nothing but a little the blacklight flashlight to look at something, and then the rest was just all locks, keys, codes. I think there's a place for both, and I would say that I generally like the higher tech rooms just because there's, some cool effects or some cool things going on, but I wouldn't say it's like a necessity to have a good escape room.
So you mentioned being a developer, and I think that's one of the reasons why I reached out to you was because I'm also a developer. And so when I play escape rooms, I come at it from a very process oriented, or, like I start identifying, like you said, that some of those aspects. So do you feel like it's beneficial to be more technically minded, or is it maybe your curiosity and your desire to solve puzzles is sort of what drew you into software engineering in the first place?
Yeah, so I think it was actually my curiosity and I enjoy solving puzzles and problems and like coming up with like, an interesting solution or a new solution for something. That's like where I feel like I thrive. And once I did that first room where that was a possibility, that's what really was attractive to me. Having like, the background knowledge in tech and, knowing how to like think through processes and troubleshoot things, it's good. But then it could also, on the other hand, like take away from some of the immersion because sometimes I'll get way too analytical on things instead of just being like, one of my friends will notice some of the less analytical things like, oh, well, the story, it wouldn't make sense if, this was in this order. And I'm like, you're right. So there's, it's good and bad, but I've come to learn how to have a good mix of that and try to like think out of the technical box a little more, both in escape rooms and work life. I work with with people a lot, so you can't always use analytics for all of that.
Yeah, so I think that's an interesting point. My question is really around how does your software engineering background affect how you work in an escape room, but maybe it's the other way too, right? Is your experience with doing so many escape rooms now, maybe like has that had an impact in how you approach problems in your software engineering side of stuff?
I I would say so. There's like one. I usually do escape rooms with generally the same group of friends. And we always have like a few things that we always say like, all right, make sure we do this, this, and this. And one thing is to not discredit any ideas. And if something seems like it's not right, it doesn't mean it's not potentially the answer or the problem. And I've noticed a lot. There'll be times where I'm trying to resolve a problem that's happening, and it's like, oh, why the heck is this happening? Like maybe it's no, it shouldn't be that. That's not how that works. But then actually like thinking, okay, well, in escape rooms, like sometimes looking into that further will show you that something else is actually wrong. The answer is not where you think it is. So I've taken that aspect into my work life as well. And that's helped a lot because, with web and technologies, like there's so many things that could be happening. There's so many moving parts. It helps you to like think outside of the box and like find different solutions. So I think it kind of goes back and forth where like work helps with the escape rooms and the escape rooms help with work, which is why I think a lot of companies will do group escape rooms.
Have you done one of those like an escape room where either they come to you or you bring your colleagues to an escape room before? Have you done that at work?
I only did one like work officiated escape room, but it was over Zoom and it was just
Uh,
kind of a weird experience. You basically have to like tell the person to go do something while you're like kind of looking in the screen with a bunch of other people that are also saying things. But I've done escape rooms with coworkers like during either like a work company trip or something, and that's been really fun. But yeah, I haven't done too many with my actual work team.
okay. You mentioned something a minute ago about because you play with the same group often, you have a set of things that you like, these are the things that we do when we get in the room. And I think that's a common thing, but I think it's interesting. Like, can you talk about some of those things that you do?
Yeah, so I actually took a couple of right before this call. I was like, oh, I should probably think of some of this stuff before I get the questions asked and draw blanks. Um, yeah, so I wrote down basically like a couple of things that I feel like we learned and like noted. One, I already mentioned, like never rule out a possibility of like, no, that's probably not the answer, because there's been so many times where it ended up being the answer because, you know, whoever created the room might think differently from you, or they didn't want to give the obvious answer. Another thing was, and this is only when you're doing rooms with others, but always have more than one person look at something. You can stare at something for 10 minutes and you don't notice something, and then someone else will walk over and be like, well, what's that thing in the corner? And then you're like, oh, great. Another one is always check the same area twice. In escape rooms, like scavenging is a really big thing. A key hidden in a corner somewhere. So it's good to double check. One thing we personally like to do is like choose a designated area for like found items and used items. So we'll have like a table or a desk and put everything we find on that table so people know where to find it, where to go to it. And things that we already used, we'll just toss in a different corner of the room so that we're not trying to solve a puzzle with something that's already been used. One thing we do that might be a little different from other people doing rooms is we always just call out if we see something that might be notable. We first get in the room and then sometimes the video will start playing, and we'll already be like, on the left wall there's three words there that might be important, or it looks like this part moves over here, so we might want to check this out. And the whole time, we're all doing our own thing sometimes, but we're calling out what we see, because later on something might click and I'll be like, oh wait, you said there was a blue circle on something, like this needs a blue circle, and that connection can happen. But if they never said anything, I would have to find it myself. When you get stuck on something, I'm someone that always wants, like, I really want to solve it and find the answer, but you only have 60 minutes or however many minutes were designated. Sometimes it's just good to just switch, just have someone else take over, you work on something else, and get like a refresher on your thinking. And then this is kind of a reiteration, but always say what you're thinking, even if it sounds stupid or might not be the right answer. It could help someone else come up with a solution. So those are like the main things. That, and like don't get discouraged if someone's like, that's not the right answer, or or something like that.
Yeah. A couple of those things you mentioned, definitely same when I'm doing a room. But a couple of those things feel like they're like you have to think about approaching a puzzle in a certain way. And because, again, everybody thinks about things differently, what I've heard and I tend to find in the group that I play with is that people, especially if you play with people over and over, you settle into kind of a role within your group. Do you find that that's the case? And if so, like, can you sort of categorize what those roles might be in your group?
Yeah. So early on, when we started getting obsessed with escape rooms, we actually looked up like tips for escape rooms. And that was one thing that someone mentioned, like, it doesn't have to be a specific role, but like designate someone to be, coordinating everything, someone that would, could be like the math person, or, keep track of things. And I have a friend that we usually designate him to be the like keep track of everything holistically and, remember stuff. Um, they usually throw me at all of the like puzzles or problems, like to try to figure out what's going on. And then I have a friend that we always make him do the math because he just comes up with right answers a lot more than we do. That's like kind of loosely how we handle that. And then when it's a certain, like, I don't do rooms with more than four people total, just because I think it's just always less enjoyable. I find when it's that, we'll like split off into pairs of twos. Usually we know who like our pairs are, just because like we have like a good collaborative like mindset. But even then we'll switch people and change up how we do things. But we do have those general roles loosely.
Cool. Okay. Let's see. I mentioned that. Okay. Yeah. So, you talked about like having done maybe a couple escape rooms with coworkers or at work or things like that. But one of the things that drew me to your profile was that you list an escape room enthusiast on your LinkedIn profile. What about that hobby is important to share professionally about yourself? What does that signal to potential employers or to people looking at you professionally?
So I think it's a couple of different things. One, everybody who does any kind of web development, they'll have like web developer, Angular, this, and that's what everybody has. But I think it's important to show another aspect of you or like something else that to show that you have interests or, outside hobbies. And the other part of that is, like we discussed earlier, there are a lot of aspects of doing escape rooms that apply to the type of roles that I would be working in. So I thought it would be a good supplementary like skill set to mention, along with just, sharing a little bit more about me. LinkedIn can get stale and, very false, just very corporate. And I want to be a person and let other people know that that's who I am.
I think that's awesome. And I agree again, because when I was coming through, even just searching on LinkedIn for escape rooms, like you came up because of that. I'm assuming because of that, because I didn't see anything else escape room oriented on your profile. Like it does, humanize you quite a bit to be like, okay, well, there's more there than just a developer or whatever. And again, it made me curious to learn more about that with you. Have you found that in interviews or things like that has come up or anything like that?
Yeah, so it's definitely come up. I feel like in most interviews they'll also ask like, so what do you do that's not work? And that's one that it's good to, bring up and show that I obviously have hobbies, but it's a good pivot point to kind of associate a lot of the questions people will ask. Like if, for example, when I like first started out, I didn't have a lot of real experience, but that's like something where it's like, okay, give me a scenario where, you had to overcome something. You could always relate it to escape rooms for the most part. That's something I found. Now I try to often relate more to like actual work experiences, but I'll still bring up the escape room associations and they'll ask like, what do you like about escape rooms? And it always sounds good when, it's like, oh, I love problem solving and,
Mm,
working with people to get things done. It just makes you sound like a really good team player and go getter.
yeah. Have you ever interviewed somewhere where like the person interviewing is not a fan of escape rooms and like that's a trigger for you to be like, this might not be the place that I want to work?
Not really. Usually I get the same response when I mention escape rooms. People have done like, a couple of them, but it was a work event or like, yeah, I went to like a birthday party and we did an escape room. It was all right. To which, usually I'll be like, oh, it's a lot more fun if you do it with a few people and, just dive into it. But I haven't really run into a scenario where I was like, yeah, you don't like escape rooms, this isn't gonna work.
Okay. Okay. So I want to talk a little bit about just puzzles in general, like puzzles, I guess not puzzles in general, but in terms of escape rooms. Like, do you have an idea or can you define what you think makes a great puzzle? Like, is there specific elements that you really like or certain kinds of puzzles you don't like? Like, can you kind of categorize that?
Yeah, I think for me, like and most escape rooms are good at this, but not requiring outside specific knowledge to solve a puzzle for me is really big because there's only so much that there might be a subject like I don't know a lot about, for example, like football, whereas I might know a little more about soccer, and like not having to have previous knowledge to solve a puzzle I think makes a really good puzzle. If you have everything you need, that's a good first step. Other things, I don't like when puzzles are needlessly complicated, like when they just like throw a couple of like curveballs in there for no reason. Sometimes red herring, I mean, there's a good spot for red herrings, but that's something I tend to not like. I think. I think a good puzzle for me is something that has actionable steps within the puzzle where it's not just, you know, figure out this one simple answer, like something that leads you to something else, that leads you to something else, that you bring it all together. That's like a really good holistic puzzle for me, which is usually at the room level where it's like to get to like the keypad, you need to solve like these four things and combine, a word or a number. Um, those are what I tend to like, but for the most part, I'm okay with a lot of different variety of puzzles. I always like a little switch up or challenge. There tends to be a
Yeah.
lot of like repetition and types of puzzles, and like there's always a cipher or some kind of riddle or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, given the number of rooms that you've done, there's certainly has to be some overlap in the
Oh yeah.
types of puzzles you come across. Like you said, like jumbled up letters of some sort, or measuring or math, or things like that. So like, and maybe that plays into sort of the engineering world as well, like finding those patterns to help you solve the puzzle. That it's something that I've heard people say is, when you've done a lot of them, you can kind of predict where it's going. You may not know the answer, but you know kind of the steps generally that you're going to take to get there. Do you think that that sort of the repetition, of those patterns makes them less enjoyable, or like do you feel, I guess they're not challenging enough, or like how do you feel about that repetition?
I guess it depends on the puzzle, but I find for the most part a good room will have some things that are, reuse types of puzzles, but they'll implement it in a new or interesting way that's slightly different. Like one thing that happens a lot is you'll get like a rope, and you're like, okay, well, I have this rope. I don't know what to use it for. And then a lot of times it's like you got to find something that's the right length, or I've seen that incorporated in so many different ways where it's like find a letter that's a certain distance from something, or find, a pole that's this length and insert it somewhere. I think it's like that variety that keeps it interesting. There are some like straightforward like jumble up words kind of things, but people have done really cool things where they'll like, the way they introduce the letters you use for the words are interesting, or you'll have to like look at shapes of things around the rooms to find the letters first. And I think that's what keeps it interesting. It's usually never like a stale, like, oh, I know we're going to do this, we're going to do this, and then we do this, and we're done, we did it. A good room introduces their own spin on these common puzzles or like puzzle structures.
Okay, cool. Do you have an example of any types of puzzles that maybe when you saw it for the first time, you just weren't sure how to approach it, or, like maybe it was part of the design of the puzzle, or something like that, but it sort of really challenged you to think specifically about the puzzle itself rather than the answer? Do you have anything that you can think of about that?
There was one, I recently went on a trip to South Korea, and we did this room where there was uh, like these ropes that were tied off on knots, and like attached to a ring, and you needed that ring to get somewhere. And I was dead set on, okay, well, there's like a knot tied, and we have to do that thing that I've seen on, like Instagram Reels or something where you can like untie it without actually like having the ends. And I was dead set on that. And how it ended up working out was actually if you just fed the end of the rope like and gave extra slack through one of the holes, you can actually like remove one of the other ropes. And that was something where it was a something that I had to like think about it as its own thing and not what I expected it to be. That's the
Cool.
only example I could go off the top of my head, but I'm sure there's
No, that's a great example, and I know exactly the thing you're talking about on Instagram Reels, the topographical exchange of rope and all that stuff.
I had to
Um,
look it up as soon as I went home because I was like, if it comes up again, even though that
it's,
wasn't the answer, I'm ready.
yeah, you're ready. Okay, so you mentioned, I did see on your profile that you've done and worked in Korea as well. Are and you mentioned a couple times traveling and playing games. Are there things that you see internationally in escape rooms that maybe you don't see here, or vice versa? Like, are you able to? I mean, I guess maybe thematically things are different or whatever, but what would you say the big changes are when you go play a room somewhere else?
So far, I found that like generally escape rooms are pretty similar around the world. So I've only like I've done obviously a lot in the US. We did some in Portugal, and then I did a bunch in Korea. And for the most part, they were generally similar. But I noticed in Korea there were a lot other interesting twists where there were a couple of rooms where before you go in the room, you choose like a power up, and each person can choose a power up. And one of them was an example of like preview something helpful from the room before you go in. And they gave you pictures of just like something that you should focus on without the details. It'll just be like this desk has some like significance. And another power was you get to bring in a mini flashlight, and another power up was like you get to get one free clue, and that was something that I've never seen in the US out of any of the rooms I've done. um and another thing I noticed they did in pretty much every room in Korea was they gave you a phone, and all of the puzzles that you need to solve were numbered. And if you needed a hint to the puzzle, you just type it into the phone and it'll give you a hint. That was an interesting thing. I typically don't like getting many hints, but I liked the idea where, you know specifically what puzzle you're working on, and it kind of helps with like the linear aspect to know like I probably need to solve this before this. But I think I prefer not knowing the order and like kind of having to figure it out. That was one main difference. The ones in Portugal, they're pretty similar to rooms here, and it was great that they had like a bilingual description on everything. It was in Portuguese and English. Um, but yeah, overall, pretty similar.
Okay, cool. So you talked about the bilingual aspect of it. Um, and I think part of it is obviously being able to read clues in the room, or deal with differences of units of measurement, things like that. But how was the experience, I guess, working with a game master? Were they also speaking English primarily, or because you're American, or uh, was that any sort of a challenge when you were doing escape rooms abroad?
Yeah, it was a bit mixed. There were some rooms where, the person running it just had really good English, or were able to like at least, give you enough that you can work with. But there were like a couple of rooms where, and I should probably preface that, I lived there for a couple of years. I have like some background and like was at an intermediate level at some point, and my girlfriend's Korean, so she obviously helped a lot. But I did one room in completely Korean, and it was like a whole different level of difficulty. Just getting tips and like updates in Korean while having to like also read it and try to like. It's not only the language; it's like there are also just like cultural aspects or like references to things that like history. Like one of them like referenced like an old king. It was stuff like that definitely added another level of complication. But it is a lot harder when the game master can't speak English. But it was still fine.
Cool. Okay, so the next kind of section I want to talk about is related to community and kinds of things like that. Because you've been around the world, have you ever seen like escape room tours or things like that seem like maybe an interesting idea?
I haven't, but I also haven't really looked. Usually when I'm traveling, it's like there are a couple of things top of mind, food and just like looking for an escape room. So I usually look up rooms myself and just like will kind of read through reviews. Yeah, I don't know of any escape room group, and I don't really like doing it with random people, obviously, just because like not that I don't like people, it's just I don't know anything about them. The level of, when I do an escape room, like I'm really into it and I'm excited to solve it. Whereas some other people might just be like, we were bored, had an extra, had a few drinks, had an extra hour, and we're like, let's try an escape room for the first time, which can like take away from the experience. So I typically try to do it with the same group or like closer friends.
Have you done escape rooms with random people before?
Yeah, I had to travel to Chicago, and I stayed an extra day, and I was like, man, I really want to do some escape rooms, but I'm here alone now. So I looked up a local room, and the only rooms that I could get booking with one person were like anybody can sign up for the room. So I did one with probably seven other people where we were split in like two prison rooms and we had to like work together to get out. And it was a family of four and then like just these three guys that were friends. And it was definitely, it was an interesting experience because they didn't have a lot of experience with escape rooms. So, and I didn't want to like just like take over. So I was just like, maybe it's like something like this. And then I just like kind of handed it off to them to figure out. So it was a cool experience. Probably not preferable to how I normally do rooms, but I think, if you're traveling and just want to try out a room, it's a good time.
Yeah, it's something that I've struggled with. I have, like you said, your same group you play with all the time, but there's occasionally times where you're somewhere else and wanna play a game or whatever, and it's just like random, or I just don't do it. And I've always just not done it because I feel like that frustration level of like not knowing how to interact with someone. There's already that barrier of, it's not a language barrier, but it's like a communication barrier almost, of like, if I tell you this, how are you going to react to that? And dealing with that on top of solving all the problems of the room feels like it would be, an extra, like you said, an extra level of difficulty. Yeah, I think that's something where I was just watching something the other day that said that typically abroad it's all private rooms, but more in the US it's more public like that. Though I don't know if that's shifted since the whole pandemic thing. But I feel like there's an opportunity somewhere to almost build like a community of people that are escape room enthusiasts. So you're getting past the barrier of like, do they know what they're doing and are ready to like go solve problems and stuff like that. That it's almost like pre-vetting, you know,
Yeah.
um, that could be a kind of cool idea. Let's see. So like beyond your group of people that you usually play with, do you participate any more broadly in the escape room community? Are you close to some specific escape rooms that, you've gotten friendly with because you've done all of their rooms, things like that? Or is it because you've done so many, you've interacted with just a lot of the different escape rooms?
Yeah, it kind of depends on the escape room place. Some of the more like corporate run escape rooms that have multiple locations, you don't really get that personable aspect of the room where, a lot of the local rooms around here, for example, there's one called the Ocean State Escape, and it's just a family that runs it. The guy that runs it mentioned, he's like, yeah, it's just something I was passionate about, and I quit my job, did this, and like my kids work here, and we did all of their rooms, and every time we went to go do a room, we would just chat with him about it, and he would like talk through how like some of the stuff works. And through doing that at a lot of places, we'll usually get recommendations to another escape room. They'll be like, oh, like they're usually not very gatekeepy about, escape. They want to recommend you to other places. And like they're usually enthusiasts themselves. So they're excited when you're excited and they want to share their experience. And we'll go to other rooms and be like, oh, yeah, this person from this place mentioned you should come here. And then they'll be like, oh, yeah, that's, John. He did the tester for this room. And because of that, there are a couple of rooms that will get emails when new rooms are coming, and they'll be like, "Hey, do you want to come do like a trial run or like an alpha test for the room?" Which is pretty cool. And through that, we've made some good connections and get the heads up on new rooms and get to test them out. There's definitely like a somewhat of a community, at least in the Rhode Island area, but no one that I like connect with often, or we'll meet up to get drinks. But we do have some of my favorite rooms are like the rooms where the person that made the room will like get excited that you enjoyed it and talk to you about it for a while. We had a room 2 weeks ago where the game master actually, she was like, "Oh, you guys like finished it with a good amount of time left before I have to reset. Do you want me to show you through the room like and see the background of how everything works and how we reset it?" And she showed us like all of the technology and like even the like server room in the back and how everything's like reset and how they handle it. And it was like a really cool experience that took it from just doing an escape room to like a whole great experience that, we have a very positive outlook on that place just because of that.
Nice. And do you find that people, the escape room owners or game masters or whatever, are pretty open to feedback? Like obviously you've got a lot of experience. Like ultimately you are probably one of their prime users to be able to get feedback from. Do you feel like they're pretty open to be like, oh yeah, you're right, that could work a little bit differently in this way, and that could be better or whatever?
Yeah, I'd say like 95% of the time they're very open to hearing, uh, if so, like one part of the room, like, hey, like this might not make sense because of this, and they're usually pretty open to be like, yeah, actually, that's a puzzle that a lot of people get stuck on for a similar reason. So we've been trying to like think of ways to rethink it in a way that, other people aren't running into the same like problem or frustration. I mean, I've had, an experience where one time that didn't go very well. And the person got very upset and kind of like defensive, and we were like, hey, we're just, just sharing like what happened with us and the problem there because we've done a lot of rooms and it didn't go well. But for the most part, a lot of the passionate room creators are very open to feedback, and they want to hear if there's something wrong, or they want to get ideas either for future iterations of rooms or even on like the current room.
Nice. Do you have you ever done like a mobile escape room? Like someone I'm not sure if we kind of covered this a little bit earlier, but have you done an escape room that's not at like a physical location that you go to?
Yeah, I've done a on
The
my
Zoom one I
phone
think you mentioned, but
Zoom one, and then I've done like some escape room apps. Just in like, oh yeah, there's like Room Escape or Cube Escape. Those are a couple apps, or it's just like, you're poking around a room, finding things and solving puzzles. Those are fun in downtime. Obviously, it's not the same full experience, but it still scratches a little bit of the itch. And then there's a game on PC called Escape Room Simulator. Yeah, and that's something that I've played a bunch with my friends because they have a whole community of people creating rooms on there, and there's a lot of really cool, unique experiences, and that's something that I've spent a good amount of time on as well. It's really
nice.
fun.
Yeah, I like that one a lot. Are there themes that you tend to gravitate towards? Like we see like some rooms here, I'm in Southern California, but some of the rooms here are like horror theme rooms where they've got people in them and very scary. Or you've got also ones that are more family oriented, all across the board, obviously. But are there ones that you find yourself gravitating towards?
I I usually will, if at the first level go by reviews and what people think. But then, if there are some themes that I tend to like more, like I like fantasy and something that sounds like it'll have more of an immersive, like kind of story behind it. And I tend to gravitate towards those a lot because it's, less of just solving puzzles and it's more of like, oh, you're getting this whole story and there's a lot behind it. I notice a lot of the like horror themed rooms will have that. They'll be like, you're trying to catch someone that, did a murder, and then you'll find out like, oh, it was actually the police officer or something. Um, so I'll tend to gravitate towards the more fantasy heavy slash like something with a unique theme because everywhere has a museum heist escape room. There's always uh, something around like doomsday or some kind of seance room. Those are like, common ones that you see all the time. So if someone has a unique room that I don't walk in and I'm like, okay, I know exactly what's going on here, I tend to want to do those a lot more.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I'm done seeing prison rooms
Oh
because
yeah.
it's too on the nose. Um, so with that in mind, you talked about sort of like the experience and like the story and the world building. You also mentioned it earlier when you were talking about the room where they guided you upstairs to like listen to that noise. Like, do you see room for growth in the escape room industry to be better about that storytelling aspect, the like in a more ongoing way? So like for example, let's say an escape room has two rooms in it. You love the first one, you immediately book the second one, you play through the second one. At that point, like there's not really a reason for you to come back to that room until they've changed out one of their rooms or built a new one. One of the things I've been really thinking about is how do escape rooms bring people back who have played them? Well, obviously, if you're loving what they're doing, you're sort of like, I love it. I'm not going to pay another, however much, $150 for it if it's the same thing over and over. Like, I'm just trying to think through like how escape rooms could be better at continuing a story or bringing you back for a different version of the same story or something like that. Do you have any idea of like, how or if that would be even useful for an escape room industry to move in that direction?
I think there's definitely room for growth in that aspect. I've been to a couple of rooms where they'll have a room and then they'll kind of sunset that room and come out with a new one, but it'll be the V2 of that room, so like the continuation. And often I don't really find escape rooms having one room and then another room that's the second part at the same time. It always seems to be like they're going to repurpose that room and replace it with the new room. I think especially with like the more tech heavy rooms, and it might take it might be a lot more complicated and it might take a lot more trials, but I think there's definitely opportunity to have the same physical room but the experience be completely different. Like it's like playing a video game. You can play the same video game 3 times in a different way, and maybe that's what, now that I think about it, Korea was going for with the power ups and switching things up like that. Like that could change the experience from one person to the other. So I think I would love to see rooms try even just like a test run of having like one solid version of the room and then testing out different iterations of the room for someone to come back and do it again. I think it's an opportunity for a lot more revenue because like at this point I have to drive at least an hour to go to any room, and we make it a whole day trip. It's like we're doing 2 rooms and getting dinner nearby. It would be a good opportunity for them to kind of like almost like having like a one of those couches where it's all in pieces and you can like change the way it's laid out. If they could do something similar to that and just kind of switch up the puzzles or switch up some of the codes based on what version of the room you're doing. And I've seen some rooms do like you can do the challenge mode of the room, but it's still essentially the same room. And if you've done it already, the challenge isn't really there because most of it. Incorporating that challenge mode type thing, but with a new experience or changing the story would be, I think it would be huge. I haven't seen anywhere that's done that successfully, but I think it's possible.
There's a room I went to play in Arizona one time. It was sort of like an Aztec temple kind of a room. And when we were doing the room, there was a specific puzzle on the wall that we never interacted with. And I always thought it was so weird. I kept going back to it and I'm like it's clearly a puzzle. I can see the thing. But none of the pieces ever like led us to it or whatever. And so when we came out of the room, I was like, what is that thing on the wall? Like, because it seems related to everything in the room, but nothing ever pointed to it. And they said that essentially you can run the room in one of 2 ways. One is as an explorer and you're trying to find the hidden idol or whatever. But the other way you run the room is as an Aztec person, and you're essentially going through and setting traps and avoiding the explorers that are coming, which does 2 things. It gives the same room. Obviously, the whole room's not changing, but the puzzles, some of the puzzles are in there that you're never going to interact with as one or the other, which I thought was confusing. But it allowed you to play that room twice, which is kind of what got me thinking about this. And the other interesting part about it was when you play them back to back, so you can play as the explorer and then back to back as the Aztec, you almost reset the room for the other one. So it actually solves a couple problems of having to take the 30 minutes to reset the room because it can just be basically the same state when you finished it. So it solves the reset time period, so you can put more people or book more people over the day. But it gives you some replayability. Like if you only got one space of room, you can at least play that same room twice in a different way. So I thought that was kind of a unique, interesting approach at doing something like that. But I think, like you said, there's a rich opportunity for escape rooms to build worlds, like take any IP that's out there, Indiana Jones, let's just say that because there's a lot of adventure rooms. Indiana Jones can go on, an unlimited amount of adventures and still be in the same universe. So I feel like there's something there where the core world is the same, but the story and how you're interacting or what adventure you're on or something like that could be different over time. So rather than having to build a brand new room, you could evolve the room, change it considerably, but continue that same sort of story. Again, I don't know. I'm not an escape room owner, so I'm sure that's way more technically challenging than I'm making it sound. But I feel like there's an opportunity to increase revenue through this, like you said, and build more, loyal fans that bring in more people because they're like, what's the next adventure going to be? Okay, so if you were talking to a friend who had never played a escape room before, what advice would you give them as for like how to start, how to approach their first room?
I would say start off with a small group, just go with a few people, find a room that's like a lower difficulty because you don't want to get discouraged, in the first room. It's just too difficult. And a lot of the more difficult rooms are kind of made for people that have done a lot of rooms and might, know some more of the like basic structures of a lot of the puzzles. And then just kind of have an open mind and try to give into the immersion and have fun. That's probably the best tips I could get. I mean, escape rooms aren't for everyone, but I think there are a lot more people that would really enjoy escape rooms that haven't done them if they were more open to the idea or had like a few people to do them with. Don't over stress it, don't overthink it, just go have fun.
Awesome. Well, I really, again, I really appreciate your time, and I know there's a lot of things out there that there are to talk about escape rooms, but I really appreciate your perspective and the stuff you shared today. So thanks for taking the time.
Yeah, no problem.